I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo and Bowling Green, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to everyone on the internet, wherever and whenever you may be. My name is Joe DeMare, and I'm here with my wonderful co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Yes, and together, Rebecca and I are going to craft yet another episode of For a Green Future here on October 13th, 2024. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment, and we talk about it in the ways that it affects you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and your families and your co-workers and the geese, which are still kind of migrating, and the hawks and the eagles that eat the geese, and the birds that, the other birds that are trying to head south or flying around confusedly this year, where who knows what's really going on with the climate and migration and so forth. But all of us together, birds, bugs, people, we are all together on this one wonderful little planet called Earth. And we have a good show for you today. We're going to be chatting for the next 10 minutes or so. Just feel free to call in at any time during the show, 877-909-1007, on any environmental topic that you want to talk about. Then we have an interview with Vickie Askins, and Vickie's going to tell us all about what's going on with the CAFOS, putting nutrients into the Maumee River. They're causing the algal blooms. There's been some recent developments there, some lawsuits and stuff. So we might possibly, after 15 years, see some action there. Then we'll hear from our fantastic advertisers and patrons. And then Rebecca will talk to us. And what will you be talking about today, Rebecca?
I will be talking about the Tainos, the native Caribbean language and cultural group.
Tainos. Okay,
Yes.
Let's hear about them. Then it's ecological news. And as I say, hopefully at some point we'll hear from you at 877-909.
This is where the Clevelanders need to step up and call and tell us more stuff that isn't included in the report.
Which report?
The one that I'm going to do.
Oh.
Because there's a bigger population of Puerto Ricans in Cleveland.
Oh, okay. So
Around here, it's all Mexicans mostly, just a few.
Okay, so Puerto Ricans and Tainos are connected then.
Basically, yeah. Puerto Rico is wild. Everybody was there because it's this big port island.
Right. Okay, cool. So, all right, people who are from Puerto Rico can stay tuned for that report from Rebecca.
Yes.
Okay, so interesting week this past week in terms of natural stuff. I finally, I think this is the sixth time or so that Northern Lights have been visible around here this year. It's been just an incredible year for Northern Lights, and I finally managed to see them this past week. Actually, what we did is we went out to Maumee Bay State Park because we figured that looking out over the lakes would be one of our best chances to get away from the man-made lights that wash them out so much. And it was a really nice experience. We went out there, we had some sleeping bags and some pillows, and we just sort of laid out, not exactly on the beach, just off the beach, so we could look up at the sky. And we definitely saw them. I mean, there was no question that there they were, but they were kind of dim, and they were, of course, looked much better in our cell phones, which is so strange that you actually now things are looking more real and more dramatic through the cell phone lens than in real life. So, but there were a lot of people there, and it was kind of a fun thing. Kids were running around in the sand, and families were. It was a very festive mood, and I was thinking about just the incredible technology involved there. That we've got these satellites that are out in space constantly watching the Earth, and so we literally saw the eruption, the coronal mass ejection, the CME, that fired all these radioactive particles off into the solar system, and we were able to plot, exactly pretty much what their route was and when exactly they would crash into the Earth and how much of the Earth would be able to see the aurora. And of course, we all learned about it over the internet, which is also an amazing piece of human technology. But at the same time, because I had a lot of time on the beach there, we were there for several hours, and most of the time we couldn't really see the lights, so we were just sort of laying there looking around. And through my binoculars, I was very clearly able to see both the smokestacks at the Monroe coal plant and the cooling tower at the Fermi 2 nuclear plant in Monroe, straight across the bay from the beach. And it just got me to thinking about, essentially we had gone there to try to escape the artificial lights. And one of the brightest things on the horizon were the power plants that were producing the light that we were trying to get away from, and they of course are all lit up and producing tons of artificial lights. And it's just an interesting thing to think about, the technology, and that the fact that the energy from those two plants was powering the lights that we drove 30 miles to get away from. Yeah.
My friend Dennis used to like to take people out in his van and just kind of park for a second and admire the lights of the BP plant, which is pretty spectacular at night, actually. It's like the Emerald City. It's all lighted up green. It was neat, but, stars are neat, too.
Right. And we drove back past, the BP plant, although it looks like it got sold to somebody else. But yeah, we saw that huge lit up area there. And, it just got me to thinking about the whole technology thing, because I think the technology that lets us see the northern lights coming and predict them is pretty cool. But I also think that the technology that is being used to produce the energy to run all this stuff, the coal and the nuclear, is pretty terrible. So at the same time, it's providing us all this wonderful information and letting us see these beautiful, northern lights, to know that they're coming and so forth. They're both also, nukes and coal, are destroying the very ecosystems, the very, life that is supporting us. And so it was really kind of a weird dichotomy there to think about that. I don't know, anybody else in our listening audience, did anybody else get out there and see the lights, and what did you think of them?
Joe, I think, is fundamentally fairly pro-technology, actually. The stereotype about environmentalists being the opposite. I have an antagonistic relationship with the entire physical world because of my ADHD. I feel that it's out to get me, and that includes technology especially. Mm-hmm. But, that's just like on a personal, as far as its relationship with humanity, I feel like it has positive potential. I just personally dislike it. That's all.
Yeah. I understand. There's lots of ways you can get tangled up in a lot of technological things.
Yeah.
But you're right. Overall,
I'm all just kind of, Og Smash Magic Box with Big Rock.
Yeah, but you're right. Overall, I do think technology is pretty cool. I think it's really wonderful that we know so much about, like coronal mass ejections, and that it's not just a complete mystery as to what's going on, physically, scientifically. And of course I do also respect the other views, like the religious views around them. I know that
Well, this is the thing. Both religion and science will give you the ooh, that's amazing feeling. The sense of, if you're looking for the sense of awe, you can go to either place or both.
right. And it was also kind of what was kind of funny in our case is we had driven all the way out there to Lake Erie. We drove all the way back to Bowling Green, and as we were pulling into the city, we decided to just go around behind the stadium there, where it's actually pretty dark back there on the north side of the stadium, and there's trees blocking the lights in the parking lot and stuff. And we stopped there and got out, and it was spectacular there. I mean, we got to see sometimes what you get is that wave of light that goes all the way across the sky, and you get flashing, and you got the different colors, the reds, the greens, and we could see them clearly with our own eyes and didn't have to whip out the phones just to see the colors. And it was just an awe-inspiring experience. And so I used my high-tech van, my plug-in hybrid van, to drive 30 miles out to the lake to try to see them. And then, turns out I would have been better off just walking over to the campus and looking up. But it was a great experience. And I also, whenever I see the Northern Lights, I'm reminded of just how incredibly tiny our little part of the universe is here. This part which is not radioactive, because most of the universe is bathed in that radiation that you see slamming into the upper atmosphere, which is part of the reason that places like Mars and the moon are completely sterile, because that radiation, if you were up in there somehow, it would tear your DNA to pieces. It would tear your cells to shreds. You would die because life and radiation do not mix. And so
what you're saying is, you shouldn't probably look up and think, oh, that's neat. I wish I could be just a couple of inches from it.
Yeah. No, right, exactly. You don't want to be close. You need to have an entire magnetosphere and atmosphere between you and those particles, or else, you wouldn't last long. And so I was thinking about that as I was looking at the nuke plant at Furby 2 across the lake, and thinking, we are manufacturing, literally those plants are churning out the same kind of radiation that's slamming into the atmosphere above us. And it's no different in terms of what they're producing in the nuke plant and what's coming down from outer space. That's the same radiation, and both of them will tear your DNA apart and cause death, disease, and all kinds of horrible things. And so it was just an interesting experience, but it was really beautiful and contemplative. And maybe I'm sort of cursed that all these other thoughts came in more than just ooh, ah. There was the oohing and ahhing. It was really nice, but just thought
Joe thinks a lot.
I think maybe too much sometimes. All right, but one of the things that it pays for us to think about around here is what's going on with Lake Erie in terms of the algal blooms, because this is really a problem which must be solved. It happens year after year, putting all these toxins into the water, messing up our fisheries. And so there's a woman named Vickie Askins who's been fighting this for some years, and I got to interview her this past week about the problem, and let's go to that interview now. Hello, and welcome to For a Green Future. Could you please share with us your name and your organization?
My name is Vickie Askins, and I'm with the Lake Erie Advocates.
Okay. And Lake Erie Advocates, what exactly do you folks advocate for?
We advocate for a clean Lake Erie, and basically we have found that the major problem that's causing the algal blooms in Lake Erie is caused by the huge animal factories, or concentrated animal feeding operations, as they call them, factory farms, I call them, in the Western Lake Erie Basin.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so could you just make the link for us between the CAFOS and the problems that Lake Erie's having?
Sure. There are millions of animals in the Western Lake Erie Basin. And most of them use a liquid manure system, and they apply that manure to tiled fields that discharge into streams, that can discharge into streams, and ultimately get to the Maumee River. And these weren't there when the lake was cleaned up back in the late 90s. None of these factory farms were in Ohio then, but since they have come into Ohio and there's just more and more all the time, the problem gets worse.
And so the manure gets into the river, and the river empties into the lake. And then what happens in the lake?
Well, all of that manure contains nutrients. And the one that causes the problem is phosphorus. And when too much phosphorus gets into the lake, it fuels the algal blooms. And some of those algal blooms contain microcystin, which is a very potent poison. And this summer, and in August, there were 620 square miles the Lake Erie algal bloom in the Western Basin. And this has been happening for years, ever since the 2014 drinking water crisis in Toledo.
Mm-hmm. And something else that's been happening for some years now is the governor's H2O program, which was supposed to fix this problem, but apparently it hasn't. Why do you think it hasn't, and what needs to be done?
Well, the H2 Ohio program, it's very similar to the 4Rs program that they came out with several years ago. In my opinion, they're throwing a lot of money into these programs so that the citizens think they're doing something about this. But H2 Ohio is all voluntary. And one of the programs in the H2 Ohio is waste utilization. So what that means is that they're using taxpayer money to give farmers and landowners $60 an acre to apply liquid manure from CAFOS, privately owned CAFOS, and they're using our taxpayer money to apply manure to those fields. And then the legislators went through and they passed a bill to make all of that information not subject to disclosure to the public.
So program which is supposed to solve the problem is actually subsidizing the cause of the problem.
Well, at least in our area, Joe, there are people that were taking manure on their fields that never took manure before. I mean, this was a big mess in Wood County. We had farmer against farmer and family against family because a lot of family farmers did not want this to come into Wood County because this is a great black swamp. They were applying liquid manure. It was, going to get into the ditches and out to Lake Erie. We've been saying that for 20 years. And it's like, and that's exactly what's happening. And it's like now I have people call me and I'll go out and see where they're applying the manure. And a lot of times it's people that never would have taken the manure before. But hey, now they get $60 an acre. So, the thing is, this manure program was only supposed to last for 3 years. But they've expanded it now to 4 years. And now it's supposed to be almost over, and they're expanding it again for 2 more years. So, why are taxpayers, why do we have to pay to apply manure from a privately owned dairy to fields that when we know that it's causing a problem with the tiles? And it's like, Governor Wine has come out recently and said he thinks there's been a 20% reduction in the phosphorus. Well, Dr. Jeff Reuter, who is the preeminent expert on Lake Erie, has come out and said maybe 1%. And it's supposed to be done in 2025. It's supposed to be 40% reduction in 2025. And Jeff says there's no way that this is going to happen.
Well, and so this whole situation has caught the attention of the federal EPA, right?
Yes.
Because I guess the Ohio EPA has taken responsibility for it, and federal's not, happy with the way Ohio's been going. And so there's a huge legal battle. Can you just kind of line up the sides for us on this legal battle?
Sure. Ohio EPA actually works under US EPA. They got that authority in 1974 to take over the NPDES permits, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permits. And so they're the ones that are supposed to be over CAFOS, which they're one pollution source. And so in 2017, the Environmental Law and Policy Center out of Chicago, this group is very concerned about Lake Erie. They came in and filed a lawsuit, and they asked the advocates to be part of it. So we joined in, and we were just trying to get Ohio EPA to even declare that the Western Basin was impaired, and they wouldn't even do that. So they filed the lawsuit, and unfortunately, one of the hearings in Cleveland, my husband went with Mike Ferner, who's the leader of our group, and the Ohio EPA was there. And every time the attorneys for the Environmental Law and Policy Center would suggest something to make the TMDL better, the EPA attorneys would say, no, we're not going to do it. And if you keep asking, we're just going to leave.
Oh,
And
okay.
So that's why.
TMDL, total maximum daily load. So the
Yes,
amount
I'm sorry.
of pollution you can put in there. And EPA, you mean Ohio EPA or federal EPA?
Ohio EPA is in charge of the Clean Water
Right.
Act program in Ohio.
Right. And so the case has not been decided, right? It's still.
Oh, no, that case was decided.
Case decided.
They
Okay.
came up with some kind of a consent decree,
Mhm.
and they finally declared the Western Basin impaired.
Okay.
But then they said, well, but there's nothing in the Clean Water Act that says when we have to do anything about it. And so finally, the judge that was over the case came back and said, we can't let this go on forever. There's obviously a big problem out in Lake Erie. So they forced them then to do a TMDL, total maximum daily load, for concentrated animal feeding operations. And so what that's supposed to do, Joe, is they're supposed to go out to the Maumee River or the lake, and wherever there's a big stream or a small river that's going into the lake, they're supposed to test it. And if there's a pollutant there, like a phosphorus pollution or E. coli pollution, then they're supposed to track it back to see where that's coming from. Only makes sense.
Right.
But they weren't willing to do that. So that's why they filed another lawsuit.
Okay, they being the federal EPA.
Environmental Law and Policy Center filed another lawsuit in 2019.
All right.
And that's when the Lucas County Board of Commissioners and the Toledo Mayor Wade Capsicavage and other groups joined into that lawsuit. And so they finally, I went to a couple meetings, and every single person at that meeting that gave public comments were all concerned about CAFO pollution. Every single person. Mm-hmm. So when they finally came out with the TMDL, it said that they had, let's see, I've got it here. CAFOs were not assigned a portion of the total phosphorus waste load because they have permits. Well, I went back and looked, and there's an EPA document that says animal farms produces much manure as small and medium-sized cities. A farm with 2,500 dairy cattle is similar in waste load to a city of 411,000 people. And they said no waste load for any of them. There was nothing in the TMDL about CAFOs. And so then in 2024, the Environmental Law and Policy Center has now returned to federal court, and they filed another suit because It's all about the CAFOS.
Right. They're the worst polluters.
Yes, and the EPA has even admitted that there is a big problem with this pollution because they just keep putting more and more CAFOs in the Western Basin. And I don't know why they think that's going to help because that's just more and more manure that they're putting on fields that are already overloaded with phosphorus. And so it's running off into, this is a former Great Black Swamp. So most of the fields around here are tiled. And so that's just a conduit to the ditch.
Right. Okay. And so very recently, I guess the most recent update is that the Farm Bureau and others have now interceded in this lawsuit that was filed in order to try to block what the environmental law and policy people are doing. Is that correct?
I'm not sure about their recent lawsuit, but they've been in this since the very beginning. In 2000, when our legislators passed a law that said that Ohio could transfer the NPDES, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permits to the ODA from the Ohio EPA, but it was subject to US EPA approval. Well, they never got that approval, and Farm Bureau wrote the bill. So they've been involved since the very beginning.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, basically there's a coalition of groups, including the Farm Bureau, that have interceded to try to block the lawsuit being brought by Environmental Law and Policy Group. But I think what we need, it's pretty clear what we need is we need that lawsuit to succeed, right? I mean,
yes, absolutely we do. I mean, you can't clean up Lake Erie unless you do something about all of the nutrients from the manure that are going into the tiles into the river. And it's like I can tell you that I'm a member of the Ohio Farmers Union, and they're getting ready to file an amicus brief in support of the Environmental Law and Policy Center. They basically represent family farmers, and the Farm Bureau basically represents industrial ag and factory farms. Right. So, I'm not sure how they can deny what's happening. I mean, that we have lots of studies that show how much manure is going into the Maumee River now that wasn't going in there 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know how they can keep denying this.
All right. Well, let's see here. So, do we have any idea what's next, how quickly that's going to proceed, or what the next thing that's going to happen?
They do drag out for a while. I haven't talked to anybody at the Environmental Law and Policy Center for a while, but thank goodness they're keeping an eye on all this stuff, because I mean, they passed the bill to allow this to happen back in 2000. So that's been 24 years ago. Right. And the US EPA finally denied their request to transfer that NPDES permit to the ODA. And they said it was because the ODA's program still did not comply with the Clean Water Act. It still did not comply with 41 of the rules and 11 of the statutes. After like 17 years, they still didn't comply with it. So, they ultimately denied it, but they know what's going on.
Right. ODA is Ohio Department of Agriculture.
Yes,
right?
I'm sorry.
All right, it's all right. Okay, well, that's about all we have time for. Do you have anything you'd like to add, or any way you'd suggest people who care about this can follow?
Well, I would suggest to people that they get involved with the Lake Erie Advocates, and we do have a website out there. I guess everybody needs to talk to their representatives because, sadly, they have not been on our side. Like I said, every time like H2 Ohio came along, they passed a law right away that said none of the information was subject to disclosure. And it's like, that's taxpayer money. We should be able to know what they're doing with it. And it's just sad because a lot of that money is actually going to the CAFO owners for putting manure on their own fields, the same fields that were polluting before. they're still putting more manure on those fields. So, it just doesn't make any sense and it's all voluntary. So, I guess they can do what they want to do, but they don't have to because the legislators won't pass any laws to prevent it from happening.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Vickie. And we're going to keep on top of this.
Okay.
All right. Have
Thanks.
a good day.
Thanks for your interest. Thanks, Joe.
All right. And that was our interview with Vickie Askins. Once again, we got to keep bringing these things up because if we just ignore them, we know the politicians won't do anything. But if we keep the pressure on them, sometimes they actually do. One thing that we're very grateful for are our advertisers and patrons. So let's hear from them now.
For a Green Future is also brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They also restore wildlife habitats and lead people on outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. There are several ways to get a hold of them and find out what's happening. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. Another is to visit their website, www.wcparks.org. The website again is www.wcparks.org. They are also available on all social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and many others. Just search for WC Parks. That's the Wood County Park District, and we're very grateful for their support.
And we're grateful for the support also of our patrons. And our patrons are wonderful people who've gone to patreon.com. That's Patreon. They searched for a Green Future, up popped our Patreon page, and they signed up to make a little monthly donation. Every month, a little bit comes painlessly out of their account, comes over to us, and that's how we could afford to keep this show on the air. And I really would like to make a very strong pitch for somebody. If you like this show, please take the time and just put that little bit of patronage in there. Just put that little tiny, you've got stuff coming out of your account probably also for like streaming services and things that you don't use. Why not put a little bit to support something that you do listen to and that you do like? So if you do like this show, please become a patron. And anyone who signs up to become a patron will receive a free copy of my book, The Nucification. So thanks very much. Now, Rebecca, it's time to turn to you. And we're talking about Tainos.
Yeah, so the Tainos are kind of significant because just the Indigenous Peoples Day is coming up as tomorrow, isn't it?
I believe so.
Okay, yeah, and the Tainos would have been the first native group that Columbus.
So Indigenous Peoples Day, formerly Columbus Day.
Yes, yeah, met when he landed in the Caribbean islands.
Mm-hmm.
They were people who lived in the Caribbean and did a lot of agriculture and fishing, mostly shifting field cultivation. And they occupied the Greater Antilles, basically, including Cuba, Jamaica, Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. And of course, I remember seeing the word Taino a lot when I was in Cleveland, because there's a substantial Puerto Rican population there. The name Taino was all over little stores. There was one called La Boricua, which El Borinquen is the Taino name for the island of Puerto Rico.
Oh.
So its use is to some degree political. And then I looked in the business closest business to you with this word in its name, and it was something called Twisted Taino Restaurant in Parma.
Huh.
Famous for previously having had a drive-through pierogi restaurant. So it's a good place for up-and-coming ethnic restaurants. Culturally and linguistically, the Tainos were Arawaks. According to Britannica, there were 1 or 2 million probably at the time of the Spanish conquest in the late 1400s. They had a big rivalry with the Carib tribe in the Lesser Antilles that controlled other smaller islands like Montserrat, Martinique, Bahamas. Yeah, that's the very first place where Columbus ever landed, just just for a second is Bahamas. I don't think he spent a lot of time there though. But yeah, so I remember there used to be, so before DNA testing, there was sort of an argument going on about whether the Caribs and the Tainos were in fact separate tribes, because apparently the Caribs were warlike, but they had at this point kidnapped so many Taino women that their DNA was substantially Taino. So yeah, they were sort of in the process of melding or something. It seems like when we stepped in, and yeah, so. What happened to them? Well, they got slaughtered by Columbus and his people, starting with, and forced onto slave plantations and all kinds of bad stuff. However, a lot of times, people were like, "Oh, there's probably a teeny tiny percentage in the DNA of somebody. Oh, yeah, but they're basically gone, wiped out, blah blah blah." No, they tested them recently, and many Puerto Ricans, Cubans, and Dominicans have Taino mitochondrial DNA. So that's their mother DNA. Some ecological problems which the descendants of the Taino who are still in the islands are dealing with would be climate change, biodiversity loss from things like invasive species, deforestation, also pollution, and tourism can degrade coastal forests and offshore islands. Some of the ecological benefits or the importance of the area is that it's one of the most biologically diverse marine environments in the world, and it protects the coast from storms and erosion, like the mainland coast of Central America and so forth. So that's like right around the divide where there's Central America and a little bit of Mexico is on the Gulf Coast. Tampico was on the Gulf, so probably that too.
All right. Well, cool. Yeah, I've been down there. It's an unbelievably beautiful area, especially when you get up in the mountains, and there's parks and things, so it's a natural area. And that story, that myth that like all the natives are gone,
right,
is very common in.
And I want to mention also, I don't want to make this about a white savior thing, but the original white savior was a Spanish priest named Bartolome de las Casas, born in 1484. He's really big. I mentioned him because he's really big in Hispanic history and culture, but you never hear about him in American history at all. But he was a Dominican friar in Hispaniola, the island that has Haiti and the Dominican Republic on it now. And he wrote 2 books, a short account of the destruction of the Indies and Historia de las Indias, the history of the Indians, which he was upset of the brutality and oppression of the Tainos to the point where he gave up his encomida and workers attached to it, his big plantation and estate. He had one, and unlike Jefferson, he was like, "No, this is not for me. I don't care how many nice books I can buy with this money." And he unfortunately briefly advocated for using African forced labor, and then switched to opposing all slavery pretty quickly. He took this pretty seriously. It said it was a terrible thing to do, but he said later in his life he prayed for mercy on his soul, but didn't know if God would grant it to him. Because he had done that, but in the end, he opposed some other big priest in a debate in front of the Spanish king, and that was arguing about whether or not Tainos and other Native Americans were full human beings, or literally the Valloid debates were about whether or not they were less than human. He thought they were human.
and he won that debate, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
and
okay.
He did, actually. Well, he ended up passing something called the New Laws in 1542 by appealing repeatedly to King Charles V. And despite apparently, he was Charles V was a Habsburg, but they hadn't become really spectacularly circus freak inbred yet, so he could hear past his giant chin.
Okay.
So yeah, unfortunately, these laws. By the time these laws were passed, the actual Tainos, their civilization had been totally destroyed. Although it may have helped save the survivors. It may be why there is still mitochondrial DNA floating around the Caribbean of
Right.
Tainos, and it affected the way brown-skinned people were treated all over the South America, Central America, Mexico, all of that.
Okay.
So
And
I just want to mention him because he's
Cool. Yeah.
he was sort of a guy who looked around him and was like, no, even when
Yeah.
everybody said it's okay, this is cool, it's in line with our values.
Yeah, and just to tie it back into the ecological point is that civilization was living in balance within the bounds of their system, of the ecology
Exactly.
around them,
Yeah.
so that they could, they didn't harvest too much fish, they didn't cut down too many trees, and we kind of came in and messed all that up.
Yippers.
Well, all right. Well, thank you, Rebecca. All right, now it's time to go on to ecological news, and we're going to start with some hopeful news. We've reported before about how sodium batteries are theoretically superior to lithium batteries. And there's a startup down there in Australia, and this is an article from October 1st in PV Magazine, and the title is Alltech's Sodium Chloride Solid-State Battery Exceeds Expectations. And so this company has made a prototype battery, a 60 kilowatt-hour prototype sodium battery. It shows a remarkable thermal stability. So it can operate at 90% efficiency at temperatures all the way up to 572 degrees Fahrenheit, which is kind of amazing. But, if it's 572 degrees Fahrenheit, probably you're not there worrying about if your battery's working or not. But also, the sodium batteries are 40% cheaper than lithium, and they're supposed to last more than 15 years. And of course, unlike lithium, they don't catch fire when they're exposed to the air or water. And so sodium batteries are better than lithium batteries. I mean, the amount of charge they hold is just fine. It kind of reminds me of, back when we were all using incandescent bulbs, right? The horribly inefficient things that used 60 watts of power to provide you some light. And LEDs came along and they could provide the same amount of light for like 5 watts or 3 watts. But there was this intermediate step. A lot of companies like Westinghouse, for example, pushed the compact fluorescents. And compact fluorescents had all kinds of, they used a lot more power than the LEDs. They were full of mercury. They were just nasty. And we shouldn't have taken that detour onto compact fluorescents. And lithium is kind of the same way. Lithium, the mining takes up, destroys a lot of area. They have lithium batteries that require a lot of rare earth elements like cobalt. And we've reported before on how cobalt mining is messing up the Democratic Republic of Congo. And so LEDs finally won out. Nobody even makes compact fluorescents anymore. So the superior technology does win in the end. But these expensive, dirty, dangerous side trips, which pretty much Elon Musk is the one who took us off onto this detour, because he picked lithium batteries for his Teslas, and that's kind of where everybody went. But the sodium, the properties of sodium have always been there, ready to be used as an energy storage, and so we're finally starting to step back over into the cleaner, more sustainable technology, and hopefully drifting away from lithium pretty quick. All right, next story, and this is from beyondnuclear.org on October 7th. And regular listeners who were listening just last week know that we were interviewing Kevin Camps for Beyond Nuclear, and he mentioned on the show that they were filing an intervention, that they had to file it the next day to try to stop or block the restart of the Palisades nuclear power plant. Well, they went ahead and they actually succeeded in filing their intervention. It was 303 pages. And basically they're saying that restarting Palisades violates the Atomic Energy Act because it's not safe. And the Atomic Energy Act requires nuclear plants to be safe. They're saying that the way it was done also violates the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. And they're saying that a new environmental impact statement has to be done for this restart of a nuclear reactor, which has never happened before. And so we wish them luck in this. As I said, it was 303 pages. They got it in on time, and they are joined in this intervention by Don't Waste Michigan, another worthy organization, Michigan Safe Energy Future, 3 Mile Island Alert joined them because, as Kevin told us last week, restarting 3 Mile Island is next on their hit list, and the Nuclear Energy and Information Service, which is out of Chicago. So a lot of really nice anti-nuclear organizations have gone in on this, and let's hope that they succeed. Next story, and this is unfortunately, this is an interesting story. I didn't know this was going on, but Hawaii, speaking of island paradises,
Yes.
Hawaii has no nuclear at all. So it's one of the least nuclear
Yeah,
contaminated
Hawaii has
places.
volcanoes. I think I'm comfortable with that.
Yes, one would agree that you don't want nukes and volcanoes don't mix.
Right.
Unfortunately, the Department of Defense disagrees.
Someone wants to put one there, don't
Yes,
they?
they're like, hey, volcanoes, let's put a nuke next to that volcano. So they have started something called Project Pele, and
Oh, God.
yes, and native or
This doesn't mean that we can pitch their executives into the volcano, does it?
I don't know if that's part of the project or
problems
not.
will go
I
away?
doubt it. I very much doubt they wrote that into Project Pele.
Because I think that would work. It would do some good anyway.
Well, anyway, Linda Williams is a physicist and a native Hawaiian, and she wrote an op-ed in the Star Advertiser. And basically what she was saying, the title of it is DOD Nuclear Project Besmirches Pele, which is besmirching. That's a great verb. I haven't heard that used in a long time. But her point is very serious. And the point is that, I'll do a quote from the article here. Quote, Pele, the Hawaiian goddess of fire, volcanoes, and creation, is not merely a mythological figure. She is a living deity who holds significant cultural and spiritual importance to native Hawaiians. And so that's her religious belief. And, we're supposed to respect everyone's religious belief. And so naming their nuclear plant Project Pele is like, it literally adds insult to injury. I mean, and it's part of that whole history that started with Columbus, the disregarding,
Right.
Disregarding their religion.
You know who is Hawaiian that I didn't know was Hawaiian?
Who?
The lady who played Mary Magdalene in the original production of Jesus Christ Superstar in the 70s.
Oh, well, that's nice.
My dad loved that song, and she had like a little modest little career as a disco singer too. Apparently, did maybe like a top 40 hit even.
Oh, that's neat.
I thought that was cool. I always wondered what ethnicity she was.
So the Department of Defense has put out a press statement about this, saying about how wonderful it is and how the Idaho National Labs helped them design this nuke, and it's just sort of a symptom. They've already bulldozed the area they plan to put this thing in, even though they're not actually going to start working on it until 2025. The Department of Defense leases 23,000 acres of Hawaii. And Linda suggests that their lease, which expires in 2029, should be revoked or reevaluated, is the word she used, because this isn't the only contamination. They've contaminated their area with depleted uranium shells. They've bulldozed tons of native plants and animals. And so basically this whole Project Pele disregards their beliefs. And she also tied it back to the indigenous people that are being harmed by the uranium mining. So literally nukes hurt native peoples from the start to the finish. So, all right, next story. And this is sort of a good news, bad news story. This is from Renew Economy, October 13th. Title, Global Shift to Renewables Has Quickened, but Still Not Fast Enough to Meet Crucial Climate Goals. And this is, they're talking about a report by the International Energy Agency. It looks like renewables are going to increase by 2.7 times by 2030, which is really impressive, but it's short of the international goal of tripling them. And it's still not enough because fossil fuels right now provide 14 times as much energy as the renewables do. So, but we are increasing, as we've said before, we're getting better, but we're still not there, but we might turn the corner. Now, 140 countries have changed policies to make renewables cheaper and make them competitive with fossil fuel. And so most new generation is wind and solar. And they're saying 95% of the renewable energy coming up is going to be solar and wind. 60% of all of it is going to be done in China. And wind power growth has slowed. So 80% of the increase is projected to be solar. But they're saying that they're going to add 11,000 gigawatts. So in other words, 11,000 nuclear power plants worth of renewables should go into be operational by 2030. One of the biggest barriers they identified was finance costs. And I know that from my days having a company that put up windmills and solar panels, is the financing really determines whether the thing goes or not. The interest rate you can get really decides if it's an economical project or not. So a really simple way to speed this up would be to provide special financing for renewables. But the wind energy is also, it's slowed, but it's also expected to recover. And so we're doing it. We're not doing it fast enough. We're not making it yet. But one thing that doesn't seem to be taken into account here is that the more you replace the fossil fuels, the less energy the fossil fuel industry uses. And so the closer we get, the rate that we replace the fossil fuels accelerates because we don't have to waste as much energy moving liquid natural gas around. And that brings us to our next story for Renew Economy, October 9th. Quote, greenwashed liquid natural gas emits 33% more carbon than coal. And the story has always been, and Biden has said this publicly, that natural gas is better for the environment than coal. But this didn't take into account, what this study by Dr. Robert Howarth at Cornell did, is he looked at the 20-year span. And the reason he did that is because even though methane, natural gas, is 80 times more powerful than CO2, it comes out of the atmosphere quicker. It only takes 20 years to come out of the atmosphere. CO2, you put it in, it takes 300 years to come out.
Oh, my.
And so...
Plus, it gives you exploding toilets. Do you want exploding toilets?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Joe declines my offer.
But what this meant is that most of the studies have looked at the 100-year mark. And if you average in, liquid natural gas, methane, it's out of the atmosphere in 20 years. So if you average it over 100 years, you've got 80 years of zeros. And so it makes it look like coal is not as dangerous. But what his study shows is that actually coal puts 120 grams of CO2 equivalent in the air per megajoule, whereas liquid natural gas puts 160 grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule.
Yowza.
So it's much more dangerous over the 20-year span, which is the 20 years that it exists. And so this really means that the whole, we could close coal plants, but we'll just decrease fracking. No. And another big part of it, of course, was the leakage that you get. We've reported on this before. Most methane now is harvested by fracking, which means you fracture huge areas of rock underground to let this methane seep up through it. And you cannot make it all go into just your little well. It seeps up through for a wide area, and literally tons and tons of methane escape out into the atmosphere. There's no way to do that. And the other big thing is the liquefying and transporting, and then regasifying, which is another amazing Scrabble word if you can get it.
Wow.
The regasifying, all that takes energy.
I think they made that one up. That's not real.
Well, yeah,
Okay, technically, they made up all the words. Okay.
that's true. Every word is made up
Yeah,
technically.
every single one.
But so, like I say, most of the studies before have averaged it out over 100 years. But of course, we don't have 100 years. The
Yeah.
next 10, the next 5 really decides whether we get to survive or not. So averaging it over 20 is much more accurate. So much for natural gas being better than coal. All right, final story. And thanks for sticking with us so long. And as usual, I try to get just kind of a good or interesting story to end on. And this is a story in nature.com on October 11th by a fellow named Smriti Maplapti. And I use that just to challenge myself. Title, AI scans RNA dark matter and uncovers 70,000 new viruses. So basically, if you go out and just take a bunch of water and you just analyze all the different DNA in it, there's hundreds of thousands of species of plants and animals and protists and algae and, all kinds of things are in there, and viruses. And so...
Protist means invisible bugs.
Yes, all kinds of invisible bugs.
Yeah.
And so they, on average, when they sampled water, they would find like around 160,000 different viruses, and 70,000 of them were new, had never been seen before. They used AI to do it. It's what's called a protein prediction model. In other words, they said, okay, AI, here's an RNA. What kind of protein does it make? And the AI was able to say, oh, it makes this protein over here. And then they can say, oh, that protein only exists in viruses. And so doing that, they were able to identify 70,000 new ones. And they found some really weird ones that don't correspond to anything else in the virosphere,
My oh my.
which is another amazing Scrabble word. So every time they look, they keep finding more kinds of viruses and
That's
more.
how you get the thing. Do you
Yeah.
want the thing?
And more kinds of life. So thanks for looking with us.
Yes.
That's it for this week. This is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
We are signing off.
No. I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, a creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country